Imagine it's 1999 and you're a 43-year-old with 2 decades of experience as a chef. You also have a passion for writing and have spent years working on your craft to eventually release 2 books, both of which failed to sell any meaningful numbers. You've got a debt problem and you're behind on rent by a few months. And you've also got a couple decades of substance abuse mixed in. This man went on to become Anthony Bourdain, the beloved celebrity chef that made the TV show Parts Unknown, No Reservations, and a best-selling book, Kitchen Confidential. So how did this man, while in his 40s, actually become this revolutionary celebrity chef? It's so unlikely. A lot of the time celebrities start their careers much earlier in the spotlight. And it's genuinely quite rare for someone to experience such a massive change in their life this late in their life and career. But for Anthony Bourdain, this was his reality. So how did this actually happen? And I don't mean the normal stuff you probably already know, like he made iconic TV shows and wrote a best-selling book. How did this actually happen? What were the specific events that led to him even being put in the position where he was able to publish a book or create a TV show? That's what I find the most interesting and is what we'll be uncovering today. Now, before he even became a chef and before he'd even graduated from culinary school he went to, he always wanted to be a writer. Back in the early 80s, while he was working as a cook in New York, he sent an unsolicited comic pitch to a writer named Joel Rose about a young cook not unlike himself searching for heroin. Joel rejected the comic, but the two hit it off immediately and it kicked off a 35-year friendship. Now, we're going to come back to this part of the story later because it is a very important detail later in the story. While writing was one of his passions, being a chef and food eventually became his main passion. He graduated from culinary school in 1978 and worked through the late 70s, 80s, and 90s gathering much of the material he would eventually publish as a book. By his own account, he struggled with a serious heroin and cocaine addiction through a lot of the 1980s, which took out a good chunk of his 20s and 30s. But he still did manage to publish a book, Bone in the Throat, in 1995 after a couple of decades trying to be a writer and a couple of decades actually being a chef. It was a fiction crime novel about a young chef who gets caught up with the mob. Honestly, this book was a commercial failure. The book itself might be good, but in terms of changing his life or selling any meaningful numbers at the time, it didn't do much when it released. And then in 1997, he published another one, Gone Bamboo, which also failed to sell any meaningful numbers at the time. He was a successful chef, but he was struggling financially and he had passions to be a writer. But it was in 1998 that he became the executive chef at Brasserie Layal in New York. And it was during this time working here that he wrote an expose on the restaurant industry, reflecting on his decades of experience and uncovering some secrets of the industry. The essay reveals a lot of industry secrets like don't order fish on a Monday or never get your steak well done, or that brunch is where kitchens dump their leftovers, and there's a lot more alcohol and drug abuse going on behind the scenes than you would realize. He wrote it almost as an afterthought after finishing Gone Bamboo, and he'd had notes jotted down for this kind of thing for years, so he'd already had all the stories and what he wanted to talk about organized in his head. He just had to put it down on the paper. And at the time, he didn't really think it would amount to that much. He figured the audience would just be other cooks and dishwashers and not regular diners or the general public. At first, he sent it to the New York Press, which is a small magazine that didn't pay its freelancers a whole lot, but it would give it an opportunity to get out there. But they just sat on it for months and didn't run the article. And this is where the story splits off into 2 versions that have been told. For years, the story that Bourdain told publicly, that it was on one late drunken night while feeling underappreciated by the New York Press, he pulled the piece back himself and mailed it to The New Yorker, which is a much bigger magazine in New York that would get a lot more eyeballs. That's the version that he told for years, but by his own biographer's account, allegedly this isn't what actually happened. Now, what allegedly happened was that his mother, Gladys, pulled a favor to get this article in front of the right people. She'd seen the article and thought it was good enough to put in the hands of her colleague named Esther, who happened to be married to David Remnick, who was the editor of The New Yorker. So Esther handed it to her husband that same night, telling him to just be polite to Mrs. Bourdain. So this was very much just a favor that probably wasn't taken super seriously at first. And although it got in front of the right people, I'm sure this has happened hundreds of times where someone pulls a favor to get their writing or any form of art in front of someone that can help spread it to more people, and it goes nowhere. It's not published, it's not taken seriously. But on this occasion, that is not what happened. Remnick, the editor of The New York, read it and loved it, and he personally called Bourdain to accept it and say he's going to publish it in The New Yorker. And he reached out to him during the dinner shift while Anthony Bourdain was working. And then it was right after he cashed the New Yorker check that The restaurant he worked at asked to fly him out to Tokyo to help get their new branch there up to standard. Now, it was while he was on this trip that he started sending emails about what he was seeing and doing in Tokyo to his old friend, Joel Rose, if you remember, is who rejected his comic pitch earlier in the story. Now, Joel's wife is Karen Rinaldi, who is an editor at Bloomsbury Publishing, which is a book publisher. She heard the emails read out loud and thought they were great. Just the writing quality and storytelling from his emails got her attention. And she asked if he had any more stories like that, so Joel had Bourdain send her the actual restaurant essay, the one that had just been accepted by The New Yorker. She read it and saw the potential in this essay as a book idea. Now, here is again another part of this story where it splits off into two versions. According to Charles Learson's biography, she allegedly knew Bourdain was going to be in a much stronger bargaining position once the essay actually came out, because he'd start to get a lot of attention and other book publishers would see it publicly. So she moved fast and allegedly offered him $50,000 as an advance to write this book, which is probably a lot less than he could have gotten just a couple of weeks later. And she also allegedly gave him an ultimatum that he had to accept it before he even landed back in New York from Tokyo, or the deal was off. Now, it's worth mentioning that this contradicts Karen's own story that she told in a separate 2018 interview, where she described the timing as just pure coincidence and that she didn't realize the essay would come out in The New Yorker. The two sources just disagree on what actually happened. Either way, she saw the opportunity and the potential in the essay as a book idea first and took a gamble on having Anthony Bourdain write a book before anyone else would. And this $50,000 was an advance. It wasn't purchasing the rights to the entire book. So after Kitchen Confidential went on to be a huge success and sell heaps of copies, he would have seen a lot more money from it. And this is also pretty standard practice and standard business in the book publishing industry, so take from that what you will. After all that happens, Anthony comes back to New York, and about 2 weeks before the essay hits the newsstands, he gathers all of the staff at the restaurant he works at before a dinner shift and makes an announcement. He holds up the $10K check in his hand that he received for writing the New York article and announced he'd buy everyone a drink with it. Again, it was the most amount of money he'd ever had at one time up until that point in his life. But his life was about to change. Then the day that really marked the start of the second half of his life arrived. April 12th, 1999, the issue of The New Yorker that had his article in it released to the public. Now, this was a Monday when it released publicly, but there were advance copies of the article spread by publicists over the weekend before it was actually released publicly. And it created such a commotion and got so much attention that news vans were parking outside of Brasserie Leal, the restaurant he works at 6 a.m. on the Monday morning that it released, just to cover the story and probably hopefully question the staff and the man Anthony Bourdain himself about his article. And it's very interesting this time because you can even see on YouTube right now, you can see videos of these news publications interviewing Anthony just on the street before he became this massive public figure.
This is the kitchen at Leal, a French bistro in Manhattan, and this is their head chef, Anthony Bourdain. Chef Bourdain shed his kitchen whites to shed some light on the business he's been in for more than a decade. He wrote an article in The New Yorker, spilling some of the beans.
I was in a cranky mood after my last restaurant closed and felt no reason not to tell the truth about a business I both love and have mixed emotions about.
He's just a regular chef and he's giving his opinions. It's very interesting to see him at that point in his career, knowing what went on to happen, because it's the very start of that part of his life that's captured on camera. Anyway, after this, he's still under contract with Bloomsbury and starts to turn the essay into a full book. Now, there isn't a ton of detail publicly on the actual writing process, but his editor, Karen Rinaldi, said that he wrote it pretty fast and it came into the publishing company pretty close to how it ended up actually being published. It just needed like small edits here and there and not any major like restructuring or anything. And he even came up with the title himself on the spot after meeting at a bar with his publisher. He just said, I have the title Kitchen Confidential. Then Bloomsbury printed 11,000 copies for the first run, which was a pretty cautious number, to be honest. It was immediately a success. They sold out that entire first printing within the first week. And I imagine a big part of why it caught on so fast is that he'd already just got all this attention from the essay and people were already waiting for more from Anthony Bourdain. So it was like a perfect storm of events to market his book, really. There was a pre-built-in audience ready to buy it. And the success of the article and the book is what put him on the map, but the TV shows are what most people probably know him for most, and it was the success of this book which directly led to his debut on TV. Now, the TV deal came together almost as a side effect of the book. Two documentary producers picked up Kitchen Confidential and heard he was talking about a food and travel follow-up to that book. Now, they read the book and they reached out to set up a meeting with him. He wasn't actually that interested in doing television at the time. He still thought of himself as a writer and had spent the last 3 decades almost trying to be a writer. So they actually had to talk him into even trying it. But it did work. They talked him into it and they ended up shooting a 10-minute demo reel right there in the kitchen at the restaurant he worked at. It was just Bourdain talking about his idea for what would become a cook's tour. And this 10-minute demo was basically the pilot. There was no test episode or anything, and they took it straight to the Food Network. Now, Food Network bought a full series off the back of that demo alone, which by the documentary producers' accounts almost never happens. It's super, super rare. I'm sure his newfound fame and success as a writer would have helped, but still, it's a very, very rare thing. The problem was, though, Anthony Bourdain was not a TV personality yet. He was a writer. And the documentary producers said that originally it was pretty rough filming. They went to Japan and were filming a show, and he had to adjust into becoming an on-screen TV personality that's entertaining and engaging, rather than just a writer. It did actually take him a bit of time to adjust, but I'm sure if you're watching this, you know he went on to be a very successful TV show host, so I guess it worked out eventually. They ended up filming a full series of it, and a cook's tour ended up airing on Food Network in 2002, built entirely off a kitchen demo that no one really thought would turn into anything. And the rest is probably what you already know. With No Reservations and Parts Unknown and his follow-up books, Bourdain went on to be one of the most influential chefs and TV personalities of the 2000s and 2010s.